Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys and explain why it's desirable to involve as many muscles as possible when selecting exercises or doing any variation of an exercise. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. For some people, this should be counterintuitive. A lot of people would say, that's common sense, Jason. Obviously, you should be picking exercises or exercise variations that involve the most muscles if you're trying to get bigger, if you're trying to get stronger, hell, if you're even trying to burn more calories. Yeah, absolutely. You would think it would be, but that's not the way things go, because you look around, there will be people who accept that, and then you look and they actually, with their exercise selection, don't do that. Half the exercises they do don't even attempt to do that, sometimes more, even people who would accept that. So while it might seem counterintuitive, people always have this idea in their head that they need to focus or isolate on a given muscle more or whatever. And in fact, that idea is so pervasive that a lot of really, really effective programs out there get overlooked for the simple fact that they don't throw some curls in. And that's kind of what I've said in the past, is that some of these programs like Strong Lifts or Starting Strength, things that will take a noob and put a tremendous amount of muscle on them in the first 6 to 9 months in the gym, if they just wrote curls in as the fourth exercise every day, probably more guys would follow it. All right, more guys would follow it if they just threw in curls. That's all they would have to change to it. Because again, that's what people have been told, that they have to isolate muscles. And I'm not telling you not to do isolation movements. Look, if you want to do curls, knock yourself out. You want to add some curls to whatever program you're doing and they're not causing you inflammation and impeding your other lifts, and by all means, knock yourself out. Don't let me tell you not to do curls if you want to do curls, if you think you need to do them. But I might even suggest that you pick curl variations that involve the most muscles, like a cheat curl, right? Which I've demonstrated and shown you guys before. So why is it desirable specifically to involve as many muscles as possible? The most obvious one is exercise economy, but it goes deeper than this. Obviously, exercise economy. If you can involve more muscles in every exercise that you do, you can do less exercises. You can train more muscle. So again, you can get more overall hypertrophy, more overall strength, more overall energy turnover in the same amount of time in the gym, or the same number of sets. Therefore, you can get out of the gym faster and get on with your life. In other words, your front delts, pecs, triceps, if you do a bunch of heavy benching or a bunch of heavy dips, you don't necessarily need to come in and do a lot of isolation afterwards for those same muscles. You don't need to do 5 or 6 different exercises. You can do a couple of exercises, be done with it, right? You can be done with it as long as volume is sufficient to stimulate adaptation. And I think that's the difference when we start talking about this sort of stuff. With the minimalist training, some people are saying, well, no, you don't need to train that much. It's like, no, you just don't need to do the other stuff. Doesn't mean you won't benefit from doing more of the big stuff if you can handle it, because oftentimes you will. Again, as long as you're not exceeding your maximum recoverable volume, you'll still most likely benefit from a little more. It won't be a big benefit. It could be a little bit of benefit. So, more is generally better up to a certain point. But, that's the point that we get to. More can also include working more muscles. Some of it isn't just about isolation. Some of it's not just about isolation, because we can talk about compound movements. Realistically speaking, does anyone out there really think that a leg press puts more size on you than a barbell squat? There'd be some people, well, my back and everything limits my leg development on my squats. It's like, well, maybe number one, you don't know how to squat. Maybe number two, you have a weak back, and so maybe you need your back to be limiting you. If you have a really weak back, really weak core, then you have a weak link in a normal big movement that is, again, a normal human movement pattern. And let's not pretend like there aren't people out there squatting 700, 800, 900 pounds completely raw, who their backs seem to be able to do it just fine. Well, maybe your back needs development. Maybe your core needs more development. Therefore, that exercise does have the potential to put more muscle on you because you've obviously got some major weak links. And maybe it's because a person did a lot of leg pressing and a lot of leg extensions and whatever else they've done to build those muscles up, and now they've created an imbalance. If anything, taking a big movement like a squat, if you're struggling and if your legs are not the weak link in a squat, you have a muscle imbalance in a normal human movement pattern. You've created an imbalance and you need to fix that imbalance. And it might be the best way to fix that imbalance would be to do a balanced movement like that, like a squat. But does anyone honestly think you build more muscle off a leg press versus a squat? Of course you don't. Of course you don't. Let's look at other things. How about a lat pull down versus a weighted pull up? There's more muscles involved in a weighted pull up than a lat pull down. You will get more overall development. I know we could argue, well, I'm just doing it for my lats. Well, that's exactly the problem. Does anyone really think, though, that getting really, really strong on pull-ups won't give you big lats? I mean, realistically, have you ever met anyone who is strong on weighted pull-ups, particularly dead hang, from a dead hang, who doesn't have good lat development? Be pretty rare. So, obviously, they work your lats, but they also work other muscles more. There's a lot more involved in moving your whole body through space. It's a lot more involved. It's technically a superior exercise for the same goal because it involves more muscle. And that's what I'm talking about when selecting exercises that involve more muscle mass. The bigger the movement, the better it is in terms of total muscle activation. Furthermore, we get into another factor. It's not just about exercise economy. It's not just about overall muscle mass that you're stimulating. There's also the trainability of it. See, that's the problem we run into. The fewer the muscles that are involved, right? This is something you guys have probably noticed. The fewer muscles that are involved in an exercise, the more frequently you stall and plateau on that exercise. And that is one of the most important points to note, and coaches have noted this for decades. In other words, you can train on the same progression pattern, a lat pull down, longer than you can train a curl before the curl stalls, right? If you were to progress them at the same rate, starting on day one, the curl will probably stall before the lat pull down. Now, the barbell row will sometimes even go longer than the lat pull down will because, again, more muscles involved. In other words, the more secondary muscles that you can involve in any exercise, the more joints that you can involve in any given exercise. So, again, compare a leg press to a squat. The same situation. You can train it longer before it plateaus and you have to adjust something. It's easier to ensure progress. And progressive overload, it doesn't matter whether it's more tension or more volume. Again, doing more work on it is the key to muscle growth, is the key to adaptation. The bigger the exercise, the longer you can train it between plateaus before you have to start making major changes to get around those plateaus and those stalls. Well, that's a very important thing too. So if every single exercise that you're doing, it's easier to progress on over time, you're going to have more overall potential for muscle growth. And this is the sort of stuff that people need to be thinking about with this stuff. You're going to have more potential for development, for size, strength, everything else. So this is the direction people need to be going. That's why for me, people are like, man, why you're doing these 5 exercises we see you do right now. I do a little bit of extra stuff off and on off camera. But yeah, I'm focusing on 5 exercises during my cut. Why? I want to stimulate as much overall development as possible while I'm losing weight fairly quickly. Because that's the idea. I need to hold on to muscle, and the more overall muscle growth I can stimulate, the more of it I can keep. And the more overall muscle mass I keep, the more the weight I'm losing is body fat. So in my case, there's a very good reason for that. You know, it makes sense. It's not like I'm going to develop a lot of muscle in weak areas, so there's not a lot of point in focusing on that. But that's kind of a side note. But back to the main point. That's really what it comes down to. It's about exercise economy. It's about stimulating as much adaptation as possible so that you can gain as much size and strength as possible. And number three, it's about the ability to train those exercises for longer periods of time so that the gains continue to come for months longer than they would on exercises that don't use as much muscle. So there's three very good reasons to do that. Does that mean that every single exercise that you do has to follow that rule? No. But the vast majority of them should. You'll be a lot better off for it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.